Black noble, blood business. Marcus St. Clair stood at the window of his penthouse office in Harlem, 40 stories above the streets where he and his brothers first learned the true meaning of power. Behind him, a man was duct taped to an antique chair worth more than most people made in a year. The chair's leather was Italian. The blood dripping onto it was local. "You know what I find interesting, Mr. Thompson?" Marcus didn't turn around. His reflection in the window showed the stark white and black paint that covered half his face, a mark of office as old as civilization itself. "In all my years running this family's interests, do you know how many people have tried to fuck us over?" Thompson mumbled something through the tape. One of his eyes was swollen shut. "The number doesn't matter," Marcus continued. "What matters is they all made the same mistake you did. They saw four brothers running a business empire. They saw the legitimate fronts, the tech companies, the real estate holdings, the political connections, but they never saw what was really there." He finally turned, his custom black suit catching the light from the ritual candles burning in each corner of the room. Red accents in the fabric seemed to move of their own accord. "Solomon," Marcus called out, "show our friend what he's really dealing with." From the shadows stepped Marcus's younger brother, his face painted in patterns of red and black that seemed to shift in the candlelight. The ceremonial blade at his hip hummed with ancient power. "You tried to move product through our territory," Solomon said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But that's not what really pissed us off. You used our shipping routes to move something else, something old, something that should have stayed buried." Thompson's eyes widened as Solomon drew his blade. Runes older than language itself began to glow along its length. "See, most people think we're just another crime family," Marcus continued. "They think the face paint is for show, the rituals are theater, just some eccentric gangsters playing dress-up." He smiled, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "They don't understand that everything we do in the light is just a shadow of our real business." The candles flared higher. In their light, Thompson finally saw the true nature of the room, the symbols carved into the floorboards, the way the shadows moved against their source, the things watching from behind the walls. "Dominic," Marcus called out, "what did our friend's little artifact do when you traced it?" A third brother materialized from nowhere, his face a mesmerizing split of white and black that made Thompson's eyes hurt. "Killed 300 people in Queens. Their souls didn't go anywhere nice." Dominic checked his phone. "Make that 312, numbers are still climbing." "And Xavier?" Marcus asked.
And
The youngest brother looked up from his laptop in the corner, his gold and white face paint gleaming. "Got the containment algorithms running. We can minimize the damage, but..." He shook his head. "Some of those souls aren't coming back." Marcus nodded and finally approached Thompson. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and Thompson screamed behind the tape as ancient power burned through him. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said softly. "We're going to remove that tape. You're going to tell us everything about who supplied you with that artifact. Then, if we're feeling generous, we'll only take your soul instead of your whole bloodline." Thompson nodded frantically. Solomon moved to remove the tape, but Marcus held up a hand. "Oh, and Mr. Thompson? If you're thinking of running to any of our conventional competitors, just remember, the Italians might control the ports, the Russians might have the unions, the triads might run the streets. But we?" His eyes began to glow with inner fire. "We control what happens after you die." The tape came off. Thompson started talking, and somewhere in the city below, another soul slipped into darkness, marked for collection by the true kings of New York's underworld. The St. Clair brothers were open for business, both kinds. Family dinner. Mama Rosa's in Little Italy was neutral ground. Had been since 1947, when the St. Clair brothers' grandfather made a deal with the five families that was sealed in both blood and something darker. Every Sunday, the most dangerous people in New York broke bread here, conducted business, and maintained the delicate balance of power that kept the city's underworld running. Tonight was different. Tonight, the four brothers were all in attendance, something that hadn't happened in 5 years. "They're here," whispered one of the Gambetti soldiers to his boss. The elderly Don crossed himself, though he wasn't sure if he was asking protection from God or something else. The St. Clairs entered like four horsemen of a very specific apocalypse. Marcus in the lead, his white and black face paint, making him look like death personified in a three-piece suit. Solomon next, his red and black patterns screaming violence even in silence. Dominic gliding in after, his split face design playing tricks with shadow and light. Finally, Xavier, young and deadly in gold and white, already tapping away at a phone that definitely wasn't built by Apple. "Don Gambetti," Marcus greeted, taking his seat at the center table. "Don Petrocelli, Don Chen. Bratva seems to be running late." "Traffic," Don Chen said carefully. "There was an incident on the bridge." "Ah, yes." Dominic checked his phone. Tragic. All those souls trapped in metal and concrete, almost like someone was harvesting them. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Now, brothers," Marcus smiled, accepting a glass of wine that turned just slightly too red in his hands. "We're here for dinner. Business can wait until after the antipasto." Mama Rosa herself brought out the first course, 90 years old and the only person in the room besides the brothers who knew exactly what they were. She'd been cooking for creatures like them since before Ellis Island had a name. "The usual for you boys?" she asked, her ancient eyes twinkling. Blood marinara for Marcus, Solomon's steak black as sin, Dominic's shadows on rye, and little Xavier's quantum pasta. "You spoil us, Mama Rosa," Solomon grinned, his ceremonial blade humming contentedly at his hip. The other families picked at their food, watching the brothers for cues. Every boss in the room had a piece of New York's action: drugs, gambling, protection. But everyone knew the St. Clairs operated on a different level. Their territory wasn't marked on any map. Their soldiers didn't carry guns. And their product was power itself. "So," Don Petrocelli finally ventured, "about the situation in Queens?" Marcus wagged a finger. "After dinner, Don. You know the rules. Though speaking of rules," he turned to Don Chen. "That artifact your people tried moving through our territory? The one that's been eating souls, we took care of it, and its courier." Don Chen's face went pale. "Mr. Thompson was not licensed for soul trafficking?" Dominic finished. "No, he wasn't. Just like those 3 warehouses by the river aren't licensed for storing cursed objects. The ones your people think we don't know about." Xavier looked up from his phone. "Oops. Did I just accidentally email the location of those warehouses to every supernatural enforcement agency on the eastern seaboard? My quantum algorithms can be so clumsy sometimes." Don Chen's chopsticks snapped in his hands. Now, Marcus raised his glass. "Like I said, business after dinner. Tonight is for family, for tradition, for remembering why this city works the way it does." His eyes flared with inner fire. "And why some rules should never be broken." The meal continued in tense silence. The other families ate carefully, trying not to draw attention. But they all noticed how the shadows beneath the brothers' table moved wrong, how their wine never seemed to empty, how the air around them crackled with power older than the city itself. In the kitchen, Mama Rosa lit a black candle and whispered a prayer older than Christianity. On the streets outside, ordinary people hurried past the restaurant, never knowing that inside, the fate of both their world and others was being decided over veal parmesan. And at the center table, 4 brothers who looked like living art pieces continued their meal, secure in the knowledge that by dessert, everyone in the room would be reminded exactly why the St. Clair family didn't need to control the streets to rule the city. After all, what good was controlling the streets when you owned what moved in the shadows beneath them? The heavy hand. The abandoned subway station under Bedford Avenue hadn't seen a train in 30 years, but tonight it was seeing plenty of action. Solomon St. Clair stood at the top of the rusted escalator, his red and black war paint gleaming in the emergency lights. Below, 20 of Don Chen's men were setting up what they thought was just another drug lab. They hadn't noticed that the chemical runoff was feeding something in the tunnels. Something old. Something hungry. "Boss?" Sarah Chen whispered from his right. No relation to the Don. She'd earned her place in Solomon's crew the hard way. "Quantum readings are spiking. Whatever they're cooking down there, it ain't just heroin." Solomon's ceremonial blade hummed at his hip. "Xavier's sensors picking up anything?" "Yeah." Sarah checked her enchanted tactical gear. "Says they're using human souls as a binding agent, mixing them with something from the old world, creating hell junkies." "In my fucking city." Solomon's voice carried enough power to make the concrete crack. "Team 1, seal the tunnels. Team 2, with me. Nobody leaves, nothing gets summoned, and somebody better tell me who's supplying them with souls before I get creative." His strike team moved like shadows with teeth. Each operator wore tactical gear marked with runes older than civilization, carrying weapons that could hurt things on multiple planes of existence. The first guard went down without a sound, Solomon's blade passing through both body and spirit. The second had time to scream, but it came out in a language that hadn't been spoken since Babylon fell. "The hell?" One of Chen's chemists looked up from a bubbling vat of something that definitely wasn't street pharmaceuticals. "Ghost hit. We got..." Solomon emerged from the shadows, his ceremonial blade leaving trails of red light in the air. "Evening, gentlemen. Your product just failed inspection." They opened fire. Bullets bounced off Solomon's mystical shielding like rain. One brave soul tried to rush him with a knife. Solomon caught the blade with his bare hand, and the metal melted at his touch. "Now." Solomon grabbed the would-be assassin by the throat. "Let's talk about your supply chain." "You can't ACK." The man's eyes widened as Solomon's power let him see exactly what he was dealing with. Behind the face paint and the fancy suit stood something that had been old when the first cities were young. Something that had been hunting creatures like the ones they were summoning since before hunting had a name. "Team 2, clear the lab," Solomon ordered. "And somebody find me a survivor who..." "Deck!" Sarah's warning came just in time. Something massive and definitely not human erupted from one of the vats. Tentacles made of pure darkness whipped through the air, carrying the stench of 1,000 damned souls. "They actually did it," Sarah breathed, her enchanted submachine gun already firing bullets marked with blessed silver. "They made a breakthrough." Solomon's blade began to sing. "No, they made a mistake." He moved like violence given form, his weapon cutting through both physical and spiritual flesh. The creature screamed in frequencies that shattered glass and human sanity. Chen's men tried to run, but Solomon's team had sealed the exits. No one was leaving this party early. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" Solomon called out as he carved through eldritch flesh. Besides the obvious trying to summon ancient horrors thing, he ducked under a tentacle that could have torn through a bank vault. "You did it in our territory." The creature tried to speak, its voice making blood run from the ears of everyone nearby. Solomon just laughed. "Sorry, friend. I don't speak dead god, but I do speak this..." His blade erupted with power that had been old when the stars were young. The creature's physical form shredded like tissue paper in a hurricane. Its spiritual form tried to escape into the tunnels, but Solomon was faster. "Going somewhere?" He thrust the blade forward and reality itself screamed. "Team 2, contain the spillover. Sarah, get me a line to Marcus, and somebody find out who's still alive enough to tell us where they got the souls for this little science experiment." As his team moved to secure the scene, Solomon studied the ruined lab, the vats of corrupted chemicals, the ancient symbols drawn in modern blood, the desperate attempt to mix old magic with new chemistry. His phone buzzed, Xavier texting updates. More labs like this were popping up across the city. Someone was trying to industrialize forbidden magic, turn ancient horrors into street drugs, create an army of addicts who could literally sell their souls for the next fix. Solomon smiled, and somewhere in the darkness something whimpered. The war for New York's soul was about to get interesting. Good thing the St. Clair family had been fighting it since before New York had a soul to war over. Shadow games. The mayor's private office looked exactly like what you'd expect. Mahogany desk, American flag, photos of handshakes with important people. But Dominic St. Clair, watching from a leather chair worth more than the mayor's monthly salary, saw the truth behind the decor, saw the hidden wards in the walls, the protective sigils under the carpet, the desperate attempts of a powerful man to keep things like Dominic out. Amateur hour. Mr. St. Clair, Mayor Richardson's smile was pure politician. This is highly irregular. My schedule shows that you're in Jersey for a fundraiser. Dominic's split face paint caught the afternoon light, black and white patterns shifting like living ink. Meanwhile, your body double is giving a speech about infrastructure at the Hilton. Don't worry, we made sure he knows all your mannerisms. His mismatched eyes gleamed, right down to that nervous tick with your wedding ring when you lie. The mayor's hand froze mid-fidget. Now, Dominic continued about last night's incident in Bedford. The gas leak? Emergency services handled. James. Dominic's voice could have frosted hell. Let's not play games you can't win. Your pet occultist already told you what really happened, just like she told you about the other labs, the soul trafficking, the attempt to industrialize forbidden magic. He smiled. Right before she called my brother Marcus and begged for protection. The mayor's face went slack. How did you... Please. Dominic waved a hand, and the shadows in the room danced. We've owned your occultist since before you knew what an occultist was. Just like we own your police commissioner, your DA, and that thing pretending to be human that runs your planning commission. His phone buzzed. Text from Xavier. The quantum algorithms had flagged something interesting. Dominic read it and smiled wider. Oh, and we own your offshore accounts too. The ones you thought were hidden behind shell companies. He showed the mayor his phone screen. My baby brother's AI just transferred everything to a charity for orphaned demon hunters. Don't worry, you'll get a nice tax write-off. You can't, already did, but that's not why I'm here. Dominic leaned forward, and the mayor felt reality twist around him. Someone gave Don Chen's people access to high-level soul manipulation tech. Someone with connections in city government. Someone who thought they could play both sides. The mayor's collar felt tight. The permits for those labs came through your office, James. The warehouses were rezoned under your authority. The customs paperwork for importing damned souls was signed with pens from this very desk. Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Chen promised protection, the mayor blurted. Said he had connections with things older than your family. Said the old powers were coming back and I needed to pick a side. And you believed him. Dominic almost felt sorry for the man. Almost. Let me explain something, James. Something they don't teach you at Harvard or in backroom political deals. He stood, and his shadow spread across the wall like spilled ink. There are old powers in this world. Ancient, hungry things that remember when humans were just clever apes. And yes, some of them are stirring. Some of them are looking at this shiny modern world and thinking maybe it's time to take back what they lost. Dominic moved to the window, looking out over his family's city. But you know what those old powers don't understand? What Chen doesn't understand? The world changed while they slept. The game evolved. And the St. Clair family. He turned back to the mayor, his face paint now seeming to move with a life of its own. We evolved with it. The mayor's phone buzzed, alerts showing his accounts being drained, his political allies jumping ship, his carefully built power structure crumbling in real time. So here's what happens next, Dominic continued. You're going to sign some papers, transfer some assets, make some calls, and then you're going to spend the rest of your term being the clean, honest mayor this city deserves. His smile showed too many teeth. Because if you don't, we'll let everyone see what you really are, including your wife. My wife? What does... You think she married you for your charm? That protection amulet she wears, the one that's been in her family for generations? Take a closer look at the markings sometime. Our father's work. High-level glamour magic. Very expensive. The mayor's face went from red to white to slightly green. We own you, James, we always have. The only question is whether you want to be a useful asset or a cautionary tale. Dominic headed for the door, the shadows following him like loyal pets. Oh, and one more thing. He paused at the threshold. Next time an old power offers you a deal, remember this moment. Remember what real power looks like. He left the mayor sitting in his expensive chair, staring at his empty accounts, wondering exactly when he'd lost control of his city. Bad blood. The four men who walked into First Metropolitan Bank didn't set off any alarms. Not the normal ones anyway. The mystical wards hidden in the marble walls, though. Those screamed like banshees. They wore the same face paint pattern as the St. Clair brothers, white, black, and red geometric designs, with gold accents. But something was wrong about it. Like looking at a familiar face in a cracked mirror. Montclair's, one of the security guards whispered, his enchanted badge burning cold against his chest. He reached for his radio, but his hand passed right through it. In fact, he couldn't seem to move at all. Marcus Montclair, the eldest, stepped up to the counter. His face paint was an inverted version of his cousin's. Darkness where there should be light. Blood where there should be shadow. Good morning. I'm here about the contents of Safety Deposit Box 6666. That box hasn't been opened in 100 years, since the last time our families had a proper disagreement. Marcus smiled, showing teeth filed to points. Consider this our formal notice of renewed hostilities. Behind him, his brothers spread out through the lobby. Solomon Montclair, the warrior, whose red and black paint seemed to writhe on his skin like living things. Dominic Montclair, whose split-face design made people's eyes bleed if they looked too long. And Xavier Montclair, youngest and most vicious, his gold and white markings crackling with corrupted power. The St. Clairs think they own the city's soul, Marcus continued, but they forgot who sold it to them in the first place. The bank manager's eyes widened. The original contract. Indeed. Marcus placed a hand on the counter, and ancient sigils began burning through the marble. Our dear cousins have gone soft, playing power games with the mob, acting like common gangsters. They forgot what real power tastes like. Xavier laughed, the sound-making plants wither and smartphones explode. Time to remind them why the old families feared the Montclair name more than death itself. Solomon drew a blade that looked like Marcus's ceremonial sword reflected in a nightmare. Time to remind them what true darkness looks like. Dominic said nothing, but the shadows in the room began screaming. The box, please, Marcus said pleasantly. Unless you'd like my brothers to demonstrate exactly how we earned our reputation back in the bad old days, before the St. Clairs convinced themselves they could rule through anything but pure terror. The manager's hands shook as he led them to the vault. As they descended, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Cousin, he purred when Marcus St. Clair answered. Just wanted to let you know, the Montclairs are back in town. And this time? He glanced at his brothers, each one a twisted reflection of their St. Clair counterpart. This time we're not letting you pretty boys write the rules. He hung up as they reached the vault. Behind him, his brother's paint seemed to glow with unholy light. The game was about to change. The streets were about to remember what real monsters looked like. And somewhere in the city, four other brothers felt the balance of power shift like a knife in the dark. Dark mirrors. The Montclair brothers' penthouse made their cousin's tower look subtle. Where the St. Clairs hid their power behind corporate glass and steel, the Montclairs had transformed the top 3 floors of an abandoned hotel into a temple of excess and corruption. Marcus Montclair stood at a window, watching the city below, his inverted face paint making him look like death's angry twin. The room behind him was lined with artifacts that would give the Vatican nightmares, and those were just the ones they let people see. Update, he commanded. Dominic Montclair materialized from a shadow, his split face design rippling like oil on water. Our dear cousins are scrambling. Marcus St. Clair has called in every favor from Hong Kong to Hell's Kitchen. They know we're back, but they don't know why. And Solomon's little raid? Marcus asked. Going exactly as planned. While he was busy playing hero in that subway lab, we moved 3 shipments of real product through his territory. The kind that makes his hell junkies look like amateur hour. Xavier Montclair looked up from his workstation, where corrupted tech sparked and screamed. His gold and white paint seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The quantum arrays are ready. Every piece of mystic tech the St. Clairs use to monitor the city. It's about to start showing them exactly what we want them to see. Their youngest thinks he invented techno-magic, Marcus smiled. Wait until he sees what we've been doing with it for the past century in exile. Solomon Montclair entered, his ceremonial blade dripping substances that shouldn't exist in this reality. His red and black paint writhed like living tattoos. The old families are already choosing sides. The Gambettis remember who really ran the city's shadows before our cousins got soft. Marcus nodded, touching the scars hidden beneath his paint. The St. Clairs think power is about balance, control, the careful manipulation of light and dark. His eyes flared with unholy fire. Time to remind them what real power looks like. Their powers, Marcus Montclair, the Dark Sage. Where Marcus St. Clair seeks wisdom, he devours knowledge, can rip memories directly from souls, corrupts ancient artifacts instead of preserving them. His prophecies don't just see the future, they force it to happen. Solomon Montclair, the Blood Knight, turns violence into a dark art form. His blade drinks souls instead of banishing them, can transform other people's pain into raw power, has an army of warriors bound by torture instead of honor. Dominic Montclair, the Nightmare Broker, doesn't just read minds, he rewrites them, trades in secrets that drive people mad, can make shadows solid and use them as weapons. His information network runs on blackmail and cursed knowledge. Xavier Montclair, the Chaos Engineer, corrupts technology with living darkness, creates AI that feeds on human consciousness. His quantum algorithms can rewrite reality itself, turns modern innovations into weapons against their creators. Tell me again, Marcus said to his brothers, what the plan is for our dear cousins. Phase 1, Dominic started. We corrupt their power base. Every gang, every politician, every supernatural creature they've carefully cultivated. We show them what real darkness can offer. Phase 2, Solomon continued, cleaning his blade with a cloth that screamed softly. We turn their own protections against them. All those careful wards and barriers, they're about to start eating what they're supposed to guard. Phase 3, Xavier grinned, his teeth chrome and sharp. We expose them, not just to the normal world, to everything, every realm, every dimension they've been carefully hiding from. Let's see how they handle being in the spotlight. And then, Marcus finished, when they're weakened, exposed, and desperate, we remind them of the family's true legacy, the power they've been too afraid to use, the darkness they've been running from. The brothers stood in their corrupted sanctuary, each one a twisted reflection of their counterparts across the city. Where the St. Clairs wore their face paint as badges of office and tradition, the Montclairs wore theirs like war paint, savage, primal, and hungry. To family, Marcus raised a glass filled with something that might have once been wine. To power, his brothers echoed. And to showing our dear cousins. Marcus's smile was a knife in the dark, exactly what they could have been if they hadn't gone soft. In the city below, shadows began to move against their sources. In the financial district, traders started making deals that would doom their souls. And in the hidden places between reality, ancient things stirred, sensing that the Montclairs were about to remake New York in their own twisted image. The game wasn't just changing, it was about to go nuclear. Family reunion. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was closed for a private event. At least that's what the sign said. Inside, two families were about to remind New York why some bloodlines are feared more than death itself. Marcus St. Clair stood at one end of the Egyptian wing, his white and black face paint catching the dim light. His three brothers flanked him, each one a figure of controlled power. Across the hall, past countless priceless artifacts humming with hidden energy, stood their reflections gone wrong. Cousins, Marcus Montclair's voice dripped venom honey. His inverted face paint made him look like a death mask. So kind of you to accept our invitation. This isn't your city anymore, Marcus St. Clair replied evenly. You lost that right a century ago. Lost? The Montclair patriarch laughed. We didn't lose anything. We just stepped away to perfect what you've been too afraid to even attempt. Both Solomons moved at the same instant, blades clearing sheaths in perfect mirror motion. But where the St. Clair warrior's blade sang with holy fire, his cousin's weapon wept darkness. Remember when we used to practice together, cousin? Solomon Montclair's red and black paint writhed like living wounds. Before your family got soft? I remember who won those practices, Solomon St. Clair answered, his own paint patterns flaring with contained power. The Dominics watched each other like chess masters seeing their own strategies reflected. The St. Clair spy master's split-face design shifted subtly, while his Montclair counterpart's paint seemed to draw in light itself. Xavier St. Clair's fingers danced through invisible interfaces, his gold and white patterns glowing with clean power. Across the hall, his cousin's corrupted tech sparked and hissed, gold turned to rust, white to void. Enough foreplay. Marcus Montclair stepped forward. You know why we're really here. The original contract. Marcus St. Clair nodded. The one your family tried to use to enslave half of Manhattan's souls. The one your family stole from us. We didn't steal it. Marcus St. Clair's voice carried centuries of authority. We stopped you from damning this entire city. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus Montclair's smile showed too many teeth. Let's ask your constituents what they think. He snapped his fingers and the shadows around them took form. Every mob boss, corrupt politician, and supernatural creature the St. Clairs had carefully cultivated over decades appeared, their eyes glowing with Montclair corruption. See, while you were playing chess with these pieces, Marcus Montclair gestured to the crowd, we were showing them what real power looks like. No rules, no balance, just pure, profitable darkness. The Solomons moved first, their blades meeting in a clash that shattered every window in the wing. The Dominic's battle was subtler, reality warping around them as they fought with secrets instead of steel. Both Xaviers unleashed their tech, one trying to maintain the barriers between worlds, the other trying to tear them down. Ancient artifacts began to wake, choosing sides in a war that had started before the city had a name. Your way leads to chaos, Marcus St. Clair said, power building around him. Your way leads to weakness, his cousin snarled back. Look around. Your precious city is already choosing sides. They're tired of rules and balance. They want what we're offering, pure, unrestrained power. The battle exploded into magical chaos. Solomon St. Clair's blade cut through corrupted shadows, while his cousin's weapon drank light itself. Dominic St. Clair's networks clashed with his counterpart's dark intelligence web. Xavier's clean quantum fields warred with his cousin's viral algorithms. And in the center, the two Marcuses fought with power that had shaped empires. You forgot the most important lesson, Marcus St. Clair said as reality buckled around them. The one our ancestors learned the hard way. And what's that, cousin? Marcus Montclair's power had turned his paint into living darkness. Power without purpose is just violence. And violence. Marcus St. Clair's eyes began to glow with inner fire. Violence always comes home. The museum's hidden wards activated, not responding to the St. Clairs or the Montclairs, but to something older, something that had been waiting for this exact moment. As alarms began to scream and ancient power stirred, 8 men wearing the same faces but different souls prepared to show New York exactly why some family feuds can reshape reality itself. The true game was finally beginning, and the city's soul was the prize, the price of power. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian wing shook as ancient power surged through its foundations. Display cases shattered as artifacts older than civilization itself woke up, choosing sides in a war that had started before New York was even a dream. "You fool," Marcus St. Clair shouted over the chaos. "Do you realize what you've done?" Marcus Montclair's laughter was pure darkness. "We've done what you never had the guts to do, cousin. We're waking them all up. Every artifact, every sealed power, every sleeping god your family's been guarding." The massive stone sarcophagus in the center of the hall began to crack. Dark energy poured from its seams like smoke from a burning building. Solomon St. Clair's blade sang as he cut through another wave of his cousin's shadow warriors. "Marcus, the seals are breaking!" "That's the point," Solomon Montclair snarled, his own weapon drinking in the chaos. "Your family locked away the real power, kept it hidden, controlled, caged. We're setting it free." Dominic St. Clair's networks were lighting up across the city. Supernatural surges in every borough. The old wards are failing. Everything we've kept contained is finally getting the party started, Dominic Montclair finished, his split face design rippling with dark joy. "You think your mob connections are impressive? Wait until they meet our friends from the other side." Xavier St. Clair's quantum interfaces were screaming warnings. The barriers between worlds are destabilizing. Whatever they've done, it's spreading through every system. His cousin's corrupted tech pulsed in response. Integration protocols running smooth as silk. Xavier Montclair grinned. "Face it, cuz. Your clean tech can't handle what's coming." The sarcophagus exploded. From its depths rose a figure that made both families' paint patterns flare in recognition. Their ancestor, the original Clair, the one who'd first learned to harness the power they all now wielded. But something was wrong. The figure split and shifted, becoming two distinct forms, one radiant with harsh light, one writhing with living shadow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus Montclair's voice carried triumph. "The true source of our family's power, not some noble guardian of balance, but a being of pure chaos who chose sides, just like we did." "You don't understand." Marcus St. Clair's power gathered around him like a storm. The split wasn't about choosing sides, it was about preventing exactly this. The twin ancestral forms began to move, each reaching for their respective descendants. The St. Clair's paint patterns burned brighter, while the Montclairs seemed to devour light itself. "Our family wasn't given power to guard or control anything," Marcus Montclair declared. "We were given it to rule, to dominate, to show this pathetic world what real gods look like." Throughout the museum, artifacts were awakening. Ancient weapons lifted from their displays, hanging in the air like they were choosing sides. Primitive masks began to whisper in languages that hadn't been spoken since before the flood. Solomon St. Clair moved to his brother's side, blade ready. "The old powers aren't meant to be controlled. They're meant to be contained," says the man who's never truly let his blade feast, his cousin shot back. "Never let it drink deep from the well of pure violence." The Dominics circled each other, each one's network of power and influence straining under the supernatural surge. The Xavier's tech war had escalated, one trying to restore barriers, the other working to tear them down completely. "Last chance, cousins," Marcus St. Clair offered. "Help us contain this. Remember what we're supposed to be." Marcus Montclair's laugh was a knife in the dark. "Oh, we remember exactly what we're supposed to be. The question is, do you? Or did your family forget the taste of real power while playing gangster with the mortals?" The twin ancestral forms towered over them now, each one radiating power that made the air itself scream. Below the museum, the subway tunnels began to twist into new shapes. Above, the sky over Manhattan started to ripple like heat waves over asphalt. "You want power? Marcus St. Clair's eyes began to glow. Let us show you what real power looks like. Solomon, unleash your blade. Dominic, drop the veils. Xavier, initiate Protocol Omega. His brothers moved as one, their powers combining in ways that made their Montclair cousins take a step back. Family reunion's just getting started, Marcus St. Clair declared. Let's remind these prodigal cousins exactly why the St. Clairs were chosen to guard this city's soul. The ancestral forms clashed above them, light and shadow weaving into patterns that rewrote reality itself. And in the chaos below, 8 men wearing the same faces but carrying very different souls, prepared to show New York that some family feuds can wake up powers older than time itself. The city was about to learn why the name Clair, both Saint and Mont, was spoken in whispers by those who knew what really moved in the shadows between worlds, gods and monsters. The battle between the Clair families had turned the Metropolitan Museum into ground zero for an apocalypse. Above them, their ancestral power had split into twin avatars of light and shadow, their conflict threatening to tear Manhattan's very soul apart. Xavier, Marcus St. Clair commanded, his paint patterns blazing like captured stars. Show them what real innovation looks like. The youngest St. Clair brother's hands moved through quantum space, his gold and white designs pulsing with clean power. Initiating Protocol Omega. Solomon, I'm going to need some of that holy fire. Done. Solomon St. Clair's blade sang as he cut a perfect arc through reality itself, channeling its energy into his brother's systems. Dominic, cover us. The shadow diplomat's split-face design rippled as he wove veils of protection around them, his networks lighting up across the city. Every ward, every protection, every careful piece of influence the St. Clairs had built over generations activated at once. Their Montclair cousins responded with raw, corrupt force. Pathetic, Marcus Montclair snarled, his inverted paint seeming to drink in the museum's light. Still playing defense? Xavier, show them what real power looks like. The corrupted technomancer's system sparked with viral energy. Where his cousin tried to stabilize reality, he worked to tear it apart. The barriers are failing, boss. Every nightmare you ever locked away is about to come knocking. Solomon Montclair's blade wept darkness as he carved through his cousin's defenses. Feel it, brother, the old hunger. Stop holding back and embrace what we really are. The ancestral forms above them clashed again, their conflict rippling through dimensions. In the financial district, traders started speaking in tongues. In Hell's Kitchen, literal hell started leaking through the sidewalks. You never understood, Marcus St. Clair said, power gathering around him like a storm. Our family wasn't given this power to rule. We were given it because we understood its price. The only price that matters is the one we set. His cousin's laugh was razor wire. While you were playing mob boss, we were learning the truth. Power isn't meant to be controlled, it's meant to be unleashed. The Montclairs moved as one, their corrupted powers combining into something that made reality itself scream. Shadow warriors poured from Marcus's paint. Solomon's blade began drinking souls. Dominic's network spread viral chaos through the city's supernatural infrastructure. Xavier's tech started turning the museum's artifacts into weapons. But the St. Clairs were ready. Now, Marcus St. Clair commanded. Solomon's holy fire met his cousin's darkness in a clash that shook the foundations. Dominic's careful web of influence turned his cousin's chaos back on itself. Xavier's clean quantum fields began purging the corruption from the awakened artifacts. And Marcus St. Clair stepped forward, his paint patterns shifting into forms that hadn't been seen since the first cities rose from dust. You want to talk about the old powers? His voice carried weight that made both ancestral forms pause their battle. Let's talk about why they were sealed away, why our family split in the first place. His Montclair cousin's confidence wavered for the first time. You wouldn't dare. The price. The price is always blood. Marcus St. Clair's eyes began to glow with inner fire. Solomon, the blade. Dominic, the keys. Xavier, the codes. His brothers moved in perfect sync, their powers combining into something that made even their corrupted cousins step back. The St. Clair brothers began chanting in a language that predated civilization, their paint patterns synchronizing into a single perfect design. "Last chance, cousins," Marcus offered. "Help us seal this, or watch what happens when the real guardians of this city stop playing nice." Above them, the ancestral forms seemed to hold their breath. The fate of not just New York, but reality itself, hung in the balance. Marcus Montclair looked at his brothers, saw the hunger in their eyes, and smiled with too many teeth. Or we could show them what happens when both sides of the family decide to stop pretending. He began his own chant, dark and twisted, his brothers joining in perfect corruption. Their paint patterns synced into a mirror of their cousin's design. But where the St. Clairs channeled power through control, the Montclair let it flow raw and hungry. The museum's foundations began to crack. The ancestral forms grew larger, their conflict threatening to tear open the sky. And 8 men wearing the same faces but carrying very different souls prepared to show New York exactly why some family names were spoken only in whispers and prayers. The real war was about to begin, and the city's soul was just the first prize on the table. When kings fall. The Metropolitan Museum had become ground zero for an apocalypse. Reality cracked like cheap glass as the Clair families unleashed powers that hadn't been seen since the first cities burned. "You want chaos?" Marcus St. Clair's voice carried weights that made demons cover their ears. His paint patterns had evolved beyond their usual geometric precision into living symbols of pure power. "Let's show them chaos, brothers." The St. Clair family moved as one, their combined power making the air itself scream. Solomon's blade became pure light, cutting through dimensions. Dominic's network spread across the city like golden lightning. Xavier's quantum fields began rewriting the laws of physics themselves. But their Montclair cousins weren't backing down. Finally, Marcus Montclair's laugh was razor blades on steel. His corrupted paint seemed to devour light itself. The real St. Clairs come out to play. No more hiding behind mob rules and gentlemen's agreements. The Montclair brothers unleashed their full corruption. Solomon's bloody blade drank souls by the thousand. Dominic's shadow networks infected reality like a virus. Xavier's corrupted tech turned every piece of technology in Manhattan into a weapon. Above them, the twin ancestral forms, light and shadow, order and chaos, grew large enough to blot out the sky. "You know what the difference is between us, cousin?" Marcus Montclair's teeth had become fangs, his eyes pools of living darkness. "We embrace what we are. You're still trying to pretend we're anything but monsters." Wrong. Marcus St. Clair's power made the museum's marble floors ripple like water. "We're not pretending to be anything. We're choosing what kind of monsters we become." The battle erupted into pure chaos. Solomon St. Clair's holy blade met his cousin's corrupt weapon in a clash that shattered every window in Midtown. The Dominic's war of influence reached into every shadow and boardroom in the city, turning politics into literal blood sport. The Xavier's technological conflict infected the internet itself, their battle spreading through every phone and computer in Manhattan. "Feel it?" Marcus Montclair spread his arms as reality buckled. The old power, the real power. Before rules, before order, before your family decided to play protector instead of predator. New York began to transform. In the financial district, skyscrapers twisted into impossible shapes. In Hell's Kitchen, the streets literally ran with hellfire. Time itself started to stutter and skip like a broken record. "Last chance," Marcus St. Clair warned, his power gathering like a storm. "Help us contain this, or watch everything burn." "Burn?" His cousin's laugh made blood rain from the sky. "Cousin, we're going to do more than burn it. We're going to remake it, show these mortals what real gods look like." The Montclair's power exploded outward, their corruption spreading like a cancer through reality. Every dark deal, every hidden sin, every nightmare the city had ever dreamed began to wake up. But the St. Clairs were ready. "Now!" Marcus St. Clair commanded. His brothers moved in perfect sync. their powers combining into something that made even their ancestral forms pause. The St. Clair family's paint patterns synchronized into a single, perfect mandala of power. You forgot the most important lesson. Marcus St. Clair's voice shook the foundations of reality. The one our ancestors learned the hard way. Power isn't about control or chaos. It's about choice. The St. Clairs began to glow with inner fire, their combined power making the Montclairs step back for the first time. This wasn't the controlled authority they usually showed. This wasn't even the raw power their cousins wielded. This was something older. Something that had been waiting since the first Clair made the first choice between light and shadow. You want to wake up the old powers? Marcus St. Clair's eyes burned like captured suns. Fine, let's wake them all up. Reality screamed as the St. Clair brothers unleashed everything they'd been holding back. Their power wasn't cleaner or purer than their cousins. It was just as monstrous, just as hungry. But it was directed, purposeful, chosen. The Montclairs responded with pure corrupt force. The two families' power clashed like matter meeting antimatter, threatening to tear New York's very soul apart. And somewhere, in the spaces between moments, ancient beings who had been old when the world was young began to wake up and pay attention. The war for New York's soul was about to become a war for reality itself, and the Clair family, both Saint and Mont, was going to show the world exactly why some names are only spoken in prayers and curses. The gods must be hungry. The sky above Manhattan had turned the color of a bruise. Reality rippled like wet paint as the Clair family's power tore holes in the fabric of existence itself. Through these gaps, things that hadn't walked the earth since before the first cities began to emerge. You feel that, cousin? Marcus Montclair's voice dripped dark joy as ancient horrors began pouring through the cracks. His corrupted paint seemed to pulse in rhythm with their arrival. That's the sound of the old gods coming home. Marcus St. Clair watched as tentacles of pure shadow wrapped around the Empire State Building. His own paint patterns flared with controlled power. Those aren't gods, you fool. They're what the gods were running from. The museum had become a nexus of chaos. Every artifact, every sealed power, every forgotten piece of history was awakening. The Montclairs' corruption spread like a virus, while the St. Clairs fought to maintain some semblance of control. Xavier, Marcus St. Clair called out, status. The youngest St. Clair's quantum interfaces were screaming warnings. His gold and white paint glowed like captured lightning. Reality breach at 87%. Whatever's coming through, it's bigger than anything we've got records for. Let it come. Xavier Montclair's corrupted tech pulsed with viral energy. Your precious quantum barriers can't hold back the tide. The old ones are hungry. The Solomons were locked in combat that transcended physical space. Their blades, one holy fire, one corrupt darkness, cut holes in dimensions with every clash. Remember the stories? Solomon Montclair's laugh was razor wire as he parried his cousin's strike. About what the family was like before the split? Before your side got soft and decided to protect instead of rule? I remember. Solomon St. Clair's blade sang with righteous fury. I remember why we chose to change. The Dominic's battle was subtler but no less devastating. Their networks of influence and power reached into every shadow, every boardroom, every hidden place in the city. Where one brought order, the other sowed chaos. Your side never understood. Dominic Montclair's split-face design rippled like oil on water. Power isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be unleashed. Power without purpose is just violence, his cousin countered, weaving protections through the city's supernatural infrastructure. Above them, the ancestral forms had grown large enough to touch the clouds. Light and shadow, order and chaos, their battle threatened to tear reality apart at the seams. But something else was coming. The ground began to shake. The air itself seemed to scream. Through the holes in reality torn by the family's conflict, ancient eyes opened. Older than the Clair line, older than civilization, older than time itself. Yes! Marcus Montclair raised his arms in triumph as darkness poured from the sky. Come forth. Show these pretenders what real power looks like. But Marcus St. Clair saw something his cousin missed. The way the ancient horrors looked at both families with the same hungry eyes. The way they moved not just through the Montclair's corruption, but through the St. Clair's order as well. Brothers, he called out, his voice carrying power that made demons weep. Plan Omega. The St. Clair family moved as one, their paint patterns synchronizing into a single perfect mandala of power. This wasn't the controlled authority they usually showed. This wasn't even the raw power they'd been holding back. This was something else, something older than their family's split, something that made even the ancient horrors pause. You want to know the real difference between us, cousin? Marcus St. Clair's eyes burned with inner fire. You forgot why our family was given this power in the first place. It wasn't to rule. It wasn't to protect. It was to make a choice. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as the St. Clair brothers began to glow with power that hadn't been seen since the first Clair made the first choice. But the Montclairs weren't backing down. Their corruption spread like cancer, their power raw and hungry. Where their cousins chose purpose, they chose chaos. Where one side sought to direct power, the other sought to unleash it. And above them all, through the tears in reality, the truly old ones began to emerge. Beings that made both families' power look like matches in an inferno. Entities that had been ancient when the first Clair learned to paint their face with power. New York trembled as gods and monsters prepared to dance. And in the center of it all, 8 men wearing the same faces but carrying very different souls were about to learn exactly why some powers were meant to stay sealed. The real apocalypse was just beginning. And this time, there might not be enough of reality left to rebuild from the ashes. When devils deal. The ancient horrors poured through the holes in reality like hungry smoke, their presence making both Clair families' paint patterns flare in recognition. These weren't just monsters. They were the things that had taught the first Clair what monsters could be. Still think this was a good idea, cousin? Marcus St. Clair's voice cut through the chaos as tentacles of pure void wrapped around the museum's columns. Still want to wake up everything we were meant to keep sleeping? For the first time, Marcus Montclair's arrogant smile faltered. His corrupted paint seemed to shrink back from the darkness flowing around them. This isn't what was supposed to happen. No shit. Solomon St. Clair's blade sang as he cut through something with too many eyes. You wanted to prove you were the scariest monsters in New York? Congratulations. You just invited the original monsters to the party. The ancient horrors moved through both families' defenses like they weren't even there. The Montclair's corruption meant nothing to beings that had invented corruption. The St. Clair's order bounced off entities that predated the concept of order itself. Xavier, Marcus St. Clair called out. Options. Both Xaviers were frantically working their tech, clean quantum fields and viral corruption alike failing against the ancient tide. The barriers are gone, Xavier St. Clair reported, his gold and white paint pulsing with desperate power. These things, they're not just breaking through reality. They're unmaking it. Good, Xavier Montclair laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. Let it all burn, He stopped as one of the entities turned its attention directly to him. Oh fuck. Now he gets it. Dominic St. Clair's split-faced design rippled as he tried to maintain what was left of their power structure. They don't care about our family feud. They don't care about power or corruption or control. They're hungry, and we just rang the dinner bell. Above them, the ancestral forms, light and shadow, order and chaos, began to shrink back. Even they recognized what was emerging through the tears in reality. We have to seal it, Marcus St. Clair said, his paint patterns shifting into defensive formations. All of it. Now. Seal it? Marcus Montclair snarled, but his confidence was cracking. We can't seal this. You wanted to show us the price of real power? Well, there it is. The bill's come due. An ancient horror larger than the others emerged through the largest reality tear, its form making both families' paint patterns try to crawl off their faces. This wasn't just a monster. This was what gave monsters nightmares. "Brothers," Marcus St. Clair's voice carried weight that made even the horrors pause. "We have one play left, but I need all of us. All of us." He looked meaningfully at his Montclair cousins. "You can't be serious," Marcus Montclair backed away. "Work together? With you sanctimonious?" One of the ancient horrors reached for him with appendages that hurt to look at. Solomon St. Clair's blade flashed, cutting it away from his cousin at the last second. "Choose fast," Solomon growled. "Because these things, they don't care what side of the family you're on, they just see food." The Montclairs looked at each other, their corrupted paint patterns dimming as reality continued to unravel around them. "If we do this," Marcus Montclair said carefully, "we do it our way. No more playing guardian, no more holding back." "Fine." Marcus St. Clair's eyes flared with inner fire. "You want to show New York what real monsters look like? Let's show them, together." The Clair families, Saint and Mont, moved as one for the first time in a century. Their paint patterns synchronized, corruption and control flowing together into something new. Something that made even the ancient horrors take notice. "Remember the old words?" Marcus St. Clair asked his cousin. "Never forgot them." Marcus Montclair's smile showed too many teeth. "Been waiting for an excuse to use them." 8 men wearing the same faces but carrying different souls began to chant in a language that predated language itself. Their power, both controlled and corrupt, combined into something that hadn't been seen since the first Clair family chose to split their legacy. The ancient horrors sensed the change. They moved to stop it, reaching with appendages that could unmake reality. But they were too late. The Clair family, whole and divided, pure and corrupt, light and shadow, was about to remind New York why some names were spoken only in prayers and nightmares. And this time they weren't holding anything back. The blood remembers. The Clair family stood united for the first time in a century, their paint patterns merging into designs that hadn't been seen since before the split. Light and shadow, order and chaos, flowing together into something that made reality itself hold its breath. "Remember how it goes?" Marcus St. Clair asked, his power intertwining with his cousin's darkness. "Like riding a bike straight to hell," Marcus Montclair grinned, his corruption finding purpose in his cousin's control. The Solomons moved in perfect sync, their blades, one holy fire, one corrupt darkness, combining into weapons that could cut through time itself. The Dominic's networks merged, order and chaos flowing together into perfect manipulation of reality. The Xavier's tech transcended both clean and viral power, becoming something that could rewrite the laws of physics. Been a while since the family really cut loose. Solomon Montclair's laugh was razor wire wrapped in velvet as ancient horrors approached. "Think New York can handle it?" "New York's about to learn why the old ones feared the Clair name," his cousin replied, their combined blade work creating patterns that made demons weep. The ancient horrors sensed the change. They moved to strike, reaching with appendages that could unmake reality. But the Clair family was ready. "Now!" Both Marcuses commanded in perfect sync. 8 voices spoke words that hadn't been uttered since the first cities burned. Their paint patterns blazed with power that transcended both light and shadow. This wasn't just magic. This wasn't just power. This was what gave gods nightmares. The museum's marble floor cracked as sigils older than civilization carved themselves into reality. The ancient horrors tried to retreat, recognizing the patterns that had sealed them away the first time. "Your side gets to play hero," Marcus Montclair called to his cousin as they channeled power that could shatter worlds. "Our side gets to remind them why they should be afraid." Less talking. Marcus St. Clair's eyes burned like captured suns. More apocalypse. The Clair family moved as one, their combined power making New York itself scream. Solomon St. Clair's holy blade cut holes in reality that Solomon Montclair's corrupt weapon filled with screaming darkness. The Dominics rewrote the city's supernatural infrastructure, turning every shadow and secret into a weapon. The Xaviers' merged technology reached through time itself, pulling power from past and future. Ancient horrors tried to fight back, but they faced something they hadn't seen since before time had a name. The Clare family working in perfect, terrible harmony. You know what the real difference is? Marcus St. Clair's voice carried weights that made reality buckle. Between our sides of the family? Enlighten me, cousin, Marcus Montclair snarled as they pushed back the void together. Your side wanted to rule through fear. Our side wanted to protect through control. Marcus St. Clair's paint patterns blazed. But the real power, the original power, it was never about either. The museum became ground zero for power that New York would never forget. The Clare family, all 8 of them, channeled forces that had been old when the first human painted their face and called it magic. The real power, Marcus Montclair realized as their combined strength made ancient horrors retreat, was in the choice. The balance. The family, Marcus St. Clair finished. Reality began to heal as the Clare bloodline demonstrated exactly why some names were whispered in both prayers and curses. Their paint patterns, both light and shadow, burned with authority that made even the old ones think twice. The ancient horrors fought back with everything they had, but they faced something worse than monsters. They faced the family that had learned to be monsters for a purpose. Whether that purpose was protection or fear, control or chaos didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the blood, the legacy, the power that had chosen the Clare line before New York was even a dream. And as reality itself bowed before their combined might, as ancient horrors fled back into the void, as New York trembled under powers it was never meant to see, 8 men wearing the same faces but carrying different souls showed the world exactly why some families were never meant to reunite. The Clare name had been feared before their split. Now the city would learn why that fear had been mercy. When gods fall. The united power of the Clare family, both Saint and Mont, had driven back the ancient horrors, but victory came with a price. Reality itself was wounded, bleeding out the very magic that had made their families great. Marcus St. Clair stood in his observatory one last time, watching as the mystical sensors dimmed one by one. His face paint, once blazing with power, now felt more like memorial marks. It's done. The old powers are fading, Marcus Montclair confirmed, studying his own corrupted patterns in a mirror that showed truth. Our war, our unity, it changed something fundamental. Around them, New York was healing, but differently. The ley lines that had powered their empire for generations were going dormant. The barriers between worlds were hardening. Magic wasn't dying, but it was retreating, becoming subtler, harder to grasp. Perhaps this is what was always meant to happen, Solomon St. Clair said, his ceremonial blade now just sharp steel instead of reality-cutting power. We were never meant to be gods. No, his Montclair cousin agreed, his own weapon transformed. We were meant to be kings, and kings will remain, just different kinds of kings. The brothers gathered, all 8 of them, in the St. Clair Tower's penthouse. Their paint patterns still marked them as something other than human, but the cosmic power that had made them living legends was ebbing. Our sons will inherit a different world, Dominic St. Clair observed, his networks already adapting, becoming more digital than mystical. A more interesting world, Dominic Montclair countered. One where power comes from wit and will instead of ancient rites. The youngest brothers, the Xaviers, were already ahead of the curve. Their fusion of technology and fading magic was pointing the way forward. Innovation instead of tradition. Evolution instead of preservation. The ancient horrors are sealed, Marcus St. Clair announced. But they're sealed with our power. The price of victory was our godhood. And good riddance, Marcus Montclair smiled, showing teeth that were now just teeth instead of fangs. Being gods was boring. Being kings, that's an art. They stood together one last time as the old guard, these 8 men who had reshaped reality itself. Their paint patterns would become symbols instead of channels for power. Their weapons would become tools instead of cosmic keys. Their influence would become more subtle, more human, but no less potent. To our sons, Marcus St. Clair raised a glass. May they build something new from what we leave behind. To the future, Marcus Montclair echoed, may they be better kings than we were gods. The city below was changing, becoming something harder, more concrete. Magic was fading into myth, but power remained. And in penthouses and boardrooms across New York, 32 young men wearing their father's paint patterns were preparing to prove that you didn't need cosmic power to rule an empire. The age of gods was ending. The age of kings was about to begin. Epilogue, 30 years later. The St. Clair Tower still dominated Manhattan's skyline, but now it housed servers instead of spellbooks, weapons instead of artifacts. In the top-floor observatory, Marcus St. Clair Jr. stood where his father once commanded reality itself, his paint pattern an echo of ancient power. Across the city, in a penthouse office that thrummed with more technology than magic, Marcus Montclair Jr. studied reports of territory disputes and profit margins, his own painted face a reminder of what their families had once been. 32 princes of 2 houses, each marked with patterns that had once channeled godhood, now prepared to carve up New York with more mundane weapons. Guns instead of spells, corporations instead of covens, digital networks instead of mystical ones. The Clair legacy was changing, evolving. The paint remained, but its meaning had shifted, from channels of power to marks of authority. The supernatural was fading, but the family's grip on New York's soul was strong as ever. A new game was beginning, and this time the rules would be written in lead and gold instead of cosmic fire. The gods were gone. Long live the kings.